Hey ChemStars, welcome back to your Chapter 2 practice. We're on pages 21 and 22 now, where we're reviewing how we can use significant figures in calculations. Remember the rules, okay? So rule number 1, when we're adding or subtracting, your answer can only show as many decimal places as the measurement having the fewest number of decimal places, okay? So you're going to perform the following calculations and then round according to that rule. So I want you to do right now, make sure you have all of these regular calculator answers filled out. If you don't and you're watching the video, I want you to pause the video, come back when you have this column all filled out. Okay, welcome back. Here should be all your calculator answers. This is how you normally add up these numbers or subtract these numbers in math class. Let's now round them according to our proper sig fig rules. Remember, we're keeping the least number of decimal places. So let's look at number 1. 2 decimals, 3 decimals. That means we've got to go to 2 decimal places. So 1, 2, the 9 is what we're rounding to. Look to the right. Can the 2 round that 9 up? Nope, it's going to stay the same. So our correctly rounded sig fig answer is 357.89 G for grams. Okay, next one, number 2. 2 decimals, 2 decimals, no decimals. So I've got to round to the nearest ones place. Okay, so here's my ones place value. Let's look right there. And that's going to be 100. Now, this one, just be a little careful. If we wrote 100, that would only have one sig fig. I was rounding to the ones place value, and I want to make sure I imply that. We're going to call this 100 point. Now, I know that looks weird for what you normally do in math class, but in chemistry, we're saying we're certain about the ones place value. That's what that 100 point does for us. So make sure you have that there. And units are liters. Okay, number 3. 1 decimal, 2. I've got to go to 1 decimal. So here's my 1 decimal place I'm rounding to. Look to the right. What does the 7 do to the 1? It bumps it up. So we've got 12.2 centimeters. Number 4, we're subtracting this time. 3 decimals, no decimals. So I've got to round to the nearest whole number, nearest 1. So look to the right. Will the 6 round that up? Yep. We've got 82s, which is seconds. That's also a base unit. Don't forget. Okay, number 5, no decimals, 2 decimals. So I've got to round to the nearest whole number, no decimal places. This is going to be 72 moles. And that's a unit we'll get into later in the year, probably around December or January. Okay, so that's a quick review of your adding and subtracting. Now let's look at a review of our multiplying and dividing sig fig rules. So when multiplying or dividing, your answer can only show as many significant figures as the measurement having the least number of sig figs. You're only as good as your weakest link in these measurements. So same thing right here. I want you, let's see, let's look on the page a little bit. I want you to make sure you pause the video if this is blank. Come back with all of your calculator answers written down. And challenge yourself. Get the correct units going. If we've got a centimeter times a centimeter, we know that the answer is going to be centimeters squared. So try and get all those units along with the correct math there. Okay, so here's what you should have gotten for your calculator answers. We've got centimeters squared, meters squared, millimeters cubed, moles per liter, which is a measurement of the concentration of a solution. We'll come to that in chapter 12, probably in the spring. And then we have grams per milliliter. That's a density measurement right here. It should look familiar. So we've got to go through and figure out how many sig figs are in the inputs, in the factors of the problem, and that determines how many we can have in our final answer. So number 1, decimals present, count from the Pacific. So remember, Pacific and Atlantic. This is the present decimal. And this is our absent counting. Okay, so present Pacific, 1, 2, 3 sig figs, 2 sig figs. That means I'm going to have to go to 2 sig figs right here. So count from this direction. 1, 2. Here's my second sig fig. We're going to round to that place value. So can the 2 round the 4 up? Nope. It's going to stay the same, 34 centimeters squared. Okay, next problem. Decimals absent, count from the Atlantic, only 1 sig fig right here, counting from that direction. Present, count from the Pacific, 3 sig figs. This is my weak link right here. I only can have 1 sig fig in my final answer. Well, okay, so what's my 1 sig fig? It's got to be the biggest place value. So here's the 1 sig fig that I'm rounding to. I've got to round to the nearest hundredths. Okay, so can 1 round up 7? Nope. My final answer is going to be 700 meters squared. I know you might not like that one, but that's the right answer because That first number, the 200, it was really uncertain. That 200 with no decimal could be anywhere from 150 to 249 meters. It all rounds to 200-ish to the nearest hundreds place. Okay, number 3. Present Pacific, 1 sig fig. Absent, count from the Atlantic, 2 sig figs, 2 sig figs. I can only have 1 sig fig in my final answer. So here is my 1 sig fig. That's a placeholder. Look to the right. Oop, that's supposed to go to the 1 right there. Look to the right. Can the 1 round up to 2? Nope. 0.2 millimeters cubed. Oh, that's going to bother me. Let's get rid of that little squiggle by the 6. Okay. Next one. Oh boy. Only 1 sig fig right there. 5,000 moles. That's a very approximate number. For fun, let's just count there. We've got 4 sig figs and 1. I've got to go to 1 sig fig right here. So I'm rounding to the nearest thousands. Does 300 round 1,000 up to 2,000? Nope. So my final answer is 1,000 moles per liter. And our last one on page 21. 2 sig figs, 2 sig figs. Here's my 2 sig figs. Look to the right. Will that round up? Yes, it will. 9.9 grams per milliliter. Okay. One last page in this video. Let's look at page 22. So here we have a bunch of different problems. Now they're all mixed. So let's take a second on this page. Let's go through and classify them. We only want to do the same type of problem as a group. We don't want to be flip-flopping and getting confused. So I'm going to highlight. Let's do all the multiplication division first. So here's a divide. Here's a multiply. Here's a divide. Here's a multiply. Here's a multiply. Okay, so what I want you to do is, if you haven't yet, go through and get all of your calculator answers, then pause the video, come back. We're going to go through and check out all of those with the same rounding rule all at one time. Welcome back. Let's look at our multiplying and dividing sig fig rules. So remember, we want to go to the least number of total sig figs when we're multiplying and dividing. So here's my calculator answers. Let's count and identify how many sig figs we have first. Okay, present. Well, let's do this over here. So remember, we've got present. That means we're going to count from the Pacific, from the left. If we have an absent, oops, I was supposed to say absent, we're going to count from the Atlantic. Okay, so here we have present Pacific, 3 sig figs, 2 sig figs. I'm going to 2 sig figs. Okay, there's my 2 sig figs. So I am 31 grams per milliliter for my properly rounded answer. Sometimes they're the same. Number 3. Don't worry about the scientific notation, that's fine. We're still going to do the math the same way. There are still only 3 sig figs here, but here there's 2. So I'm going to round to 2 sig figs. Look to the right. Will the 0 round up to 2? Nope. And we have 62 joules per second. That's a unit you're going to use a lot in chapter 4 or in physics class. It has to do with energy over time. Okay, number 6. We have an absent decimal, only 2 sig figs right there, and only 3 sig figs right there. So we're going to go to 2, 1, 2 sig figs. Look to the right. We have 3.9 meters per second. Okay. Number 8. This one, just take a minute to look at the units. We have a meter per second times a second. So if you do the algebra, that becomes a meter second over a second. Those cancel, and we're left with just meters. We have 2 sig figs, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sig figs here. My final answer can only go to 2 sig figs. This is a not very precise measurement. So 1, 2. Look to the right. Will the 2 round up to 6? Nope. So we have 2,600 meters. And number 9. Kind of same thing with the units here. We have a grams per milliliter times a milliliter. Those are going to cancel. We're going to be left with grams. So we have 2 sig figs, 3 sig figs. I can only be as good as my weakest measurement. So this has to go to 2 sig figs. So 1, 2, look to the right. That's going to be 41 grams. Okay, so we've gone through and done all the multiplication and division. Now I want us to go through and we're going to make sure we follow the different rule for the addition and the subtraction. Okay, so if you have not gotten your calculator answers for these remaining problems, pause the video, get those calculator answers written down, and then come back. Before we start rounding, let's review that addition-subtraction rule. So from the previous page, remember, when adding or subtracting, show as many decimal places as the fewest number in the inputs to the problem. Okay, so we're just counting decimal places here. So number 1, there's 2 decimal places and no decimal places. So we've got to round this to the nearest whole number. So let's look, here's my ones place, look to the tenths. Will the 5 round up to 2? Yep. So 533 grams. Okay, my next problem here is subtraction. 2 decimal places, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not counting sig figs. If I was counting sig figs, it would only be 2 sig figs. I'm counting decimal places. There's 4 decimal places here, but it doesn't matter. This number only has 2 decimals. So 1, 2, look to the right. Now this one is a little sneaky. What's the 8 going to do to the 9? Bump it up to a 10. So you'd say, oh, well that's 0.1, right? We have to have 2 decimal places. So we're actually going to show that 10. And that's 0.10 meters. So be careful on that, okay? Pay attention to your decimal places. Number 5, no decimal places. 2 decimal places. No decimal places. So I've got to round this to the nearest whole number, the nearest ones place. And that's going to be 450. And that will be centimeters. Okay? And let's see, we got 2 more left on this page. We have 298.01. So there are 2 sig figs right here. Or not 2 sig figs, be careful, 2 decimal places. 3 decimal places. So my final answer can only have 2 decimal places. So 1, 2, look to the right. 2 can't round up. So 332.12 kilograms. And our very last one on this page. So we have 1 decimal and we have no decimal places. So I've got to round, so I have no decimal places. My final answer was 125 milliliters. I'm hoping that sig figs are getting easier. Remember, just take your time, go back and look at your rules if you need a refresher. And next time, we're going to be going over the Chapter 2 review. Thanks, guys. See you next time. Bye.